Hello, this is Jason T. Ingram coming to you from Oregon, and I'm doing a series about a time in my life when I'm finally starting a business to doing the things that I love to do. I had a business about 15 years ago, but it was mostly teaching, and that was great money, 30, 40 bucks an hour, teaching groups and conducting bands and orchestras and teaching a lot of piano. I did some gigging, but it was a lot different. Um, I wasn't suffering as much, and I also had a different dynamic in my life. And I think one of those dynamics is realizing the stigma of being on disability. And it's interesting, it's sad, but it's also helping me to realize how people think about disabled folks and trying to understand why they do what they do and not to get so mad about it. I typically only get really upset at people that I feel a lot of discrimination and bigotry and stigma from those that tend to put themselves in a category of, oh, they're affirming of gays and blacks and Palestinians, and they're basically doing all the things that good liberal progressives do. And when I get a lot of stigma from those types of communities, it makes it more difficult. It's very similar to when I was working in churches and you get people that talk about love and mercy and they practice hatred and judgment. Now, we all kind of pretty much know about that when it comes to churches. But when it comes to people that are providers and that are in positions where they're making decisions about the lives of people living with disabilities, and they don't know what it's like to live in our heads. I wish there was some kind of way that I could do some kind of mind meld. In fact, I'm going to leave this on for 30 seconds and I'm going to see if I could put my depression and my mania and all of the obsessive things that I live with into this plunger, and then I'm going to give it to you. Anyways, this is my cat Keeska, if you've never met her. She's the love of my life, and sadly enough, she doesn't speak my language. But I've learned to communicate with her with like eye language, which is interesting, and using my eyes and facial expressions, and we can communicate. So here it is. Here is the plunger of the bipolar mind. Imagine, if you will, the number one thing that I've noticed lately about living with depression and other symptomatic things that people like us go through is that we don't have the luxury of some things that a lot of you live with, and that is having your will. That is being able to say, I'm going to make a decision here and I'm going to carry it through. Now, the problem with depression is you make a decision and suddenly your mind gets so bombarded with things that are pulling you the opposite way that you can't do the action that you want to do. It basically interrupts your very will to do what you need to do and what you want to do. Because the fear basically gets so wrapped up into your mind to where it's kind of like trying to stand under a waterfall and check your phone, you know. Like you're at the bottom of Niagara Falls and you're like, wait, did I get a text? No, when you're in the bottom of Niagara Falls, you're like, ah! 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 Sorry. I was having a bipolar moment. Anyways, when it comes to asking for help, I get a totally different set of responses from peers and non-peers. And what I mean by peers, those are people that living with mental illness or a disability or whatever. A lot of my friends are peers, or they're basically really understanding, or they're just, such outcasts from society that they can get along with just about anybody because they kind of have no choice. So those are a lot of my friends. It's interesting how my friends live in trailers and own guns and, you know, and here I am trying to survive in a world that's full of tofu and kale and brown rice and Priuses. And I love my progressive culture. And sometimes they do practice what they preach. But one thing that I don't see as practiced is that if they're making a judgment, like if they say, oh, Jason is spaced out because he's on pot. Well, I've been spaced out before I smoked pot. It makes me a little more spaced out most of the time. However, that's not the problem. If it was, then people can talk to me and that's fine. I just wish they would understand what exactly are the causes of my behaviors and separate them from other things in my life, like my character flaws. Am I being an egotistical asshole? Or is somehow my symptoms contributing to that? Or could it just be completely related to my symptoms? Some of my symptoms are some of the things that are hard to deal with, and it's really hard to have a will of my own when I have a messiah complex, which is this enormous self-importance that thinks I have the answers to the whole world, and if people would just listen to me, then there'd be world peace and all this good stuff. It's possible, but I doubt it. And there's other things too, is that people that live with an incredible amount of mental torment, especially when we start getting into the psychotic type disorders, which is not a bad word. It's just that there's a lot of stigma with the word psychotic. And it sounds like you're with somebody, whether they feel compassion or not. It's hard for some people to demonstrate compassion because some people are just trying to cope enough to stay out of the mental institutions. And if people would see a disabled person and they're doing this and that baby's crying, help, help, I can't stand it and I'm so irritable, and I just like, I wish that some people would view that person as, instead of he hates babies or he hates puppies, instead, oh my God, this guy is experiencing a reality that I'm not. This woman over here is experiencing a reality where everything that she's hearing in this restaurant or these television commercials, or maybe there's some hip hop music or something playing or some speed metal, and it is just bringing up all this aggression in her, but it doesn't seem to affect anybody else in that restaurant. And so she's sitting there and somebody's telling a sad story to her, like, Jill, I just had to put my dog down or something like that. Why aren't you listening to me? Don't you care about me? And so a lot of mentally ill people really have a hard time expressing love and caring to other people because they just don't know everything is going on in our heads. And the funny thing about that is that there are a lot of people that aren't peers, and some of these people know how to act compassionate and act caring and act loving. And some people are just really good actors and they can pretend to be anything. And it really comes down to one thing, is that if people look deep into the lives and into the work and the words and the expression that some people have, then they would be able to decipher what's really going on instead of making judgments. Nothing wrong with making judgments. If I didn't make judgments, I would put myself in dangerous situations, which I do happen to do. I have a tendency to be taken advantage of a lot, which a lot of disabled people have. I just heard some stories about it today, about a landlord who was taking advantage of peers and being able to tap into their resources and all this kind of stuff, because people give disabled people money. And there's somebody else waiting in line to get that money because disabled people are needy and weak, and we don't have good judgment because our minds are busy trying to survive and trying to cope. So those are some things to think about if you're dealing with people with depression and you're living with people that are mentally disabled, or maybe if you are and you're having a hard time relating to non-peers. So, and I'm doing better since last week. So thanks for watching.